Hi, I'm Dino Dini on ParallaxLive, YouTube and Twitch's very best gaming entertainment channel.
Gamers of a certain age will no doubt remember that, back in the early 90s, football games were actually still worth playing. This was largely thanks to the seminal Kickoff series, which comprised of a run of top-down arcade football games that arguably peaked with the incredible Kickoff 2 for the Commodore Amiga, still the finest home computer system that has ever existed. The series is finally making a long-awaited comeback in the form of Kickoff Revival, due for release this summer for the PlayStation 4 and Vita. We caught up with series creator and gaming legend Dino Dini at EGX Rezzed 2016 to chat about the game and to get an insight into what drives his passion for gaming.
So how would you describe the Kickoff series to someone who's got no experience with it whatsoever?
Well, I think the main point about it is that the game tries to simulate the feel, the spirit of football, in that, well, for example, the ball's not stuck to your foot. There's a physics-based game. When you shoot, it's your choice, the direction and the amount of swerve that you want to put on. So basically, the more you practice the game, the better you get, the more accurate you get at aiming and also controlling the ball. And that is a bit different from other football games, both before Kickoff originally came out in 1989, but also from what we see right now with some of the other football games out there. They have a different focus on spectacle. For me, when you score a goal, it's got to be your goal that you manage to pull off because of the work that you put into mastering the game. And I want a game where you can score a beautiful goal that feels like a beautiful goal, that it's you own it, you own that experience.
So you're going for the playability of football rather than the presentation, which is what some of the other games tend to get a little bit hung up on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the feel, the visceral feel of football, not the spectacle. It's about you on the pitch, not some likeness of a famous footballer on the pitch.
Almost grassroots.
Well, I think it is. It goes back. I mean, that's why we call it revival. It's trying to revive an idea based or connected with what video games were originally. They were skill-based games, and they were often quite hard and quite difficult to master. And that was okay, and that came from the arcade machines and so on. We kind of lost it a little bit on the way, and I would like to see that come back, because it's the root of the video game industry. It's where the video game industry was born, was from this, and I think it's important that we don't lose that.
I've often recounted to my 3 viewers how I haven't enjoyed a football game since the Amiga era, largely due to how great Kickoff 2 and its ilk were. Why do you think the Kickoff series managed to pull in people who weren't into real-life football as well as those who were?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. There are people who've said to me, I don't really like football games, but I played yours. And what we're finding now with Revival is that people who you wouldn't expect to like to play a football game, in fact they might even say, football game, but they sit down, they start playing it, and they get drawn in. And there's this thing, a lot of people think that you need to have a demographic, you need to think about who your target audience is, and I don't. What I think is, I just need to make a fun game. This is really going back to basics, isn't it?
Someone needs to send that memo to EA, I think.
Maybe. I'll comment by saying maybe.
Very mechanically speaking, how different is Kickoff Revival to, say, Kickoff 2, which was the big one?
Okay, so the biggest difference is that with those controllers back then, they were 8 directions and 1 button. No analog control at all. So it was all on, all off, and only 8 directions. So the game has been redesigned with the new controllers in mind. All right, so you can control how fast you run, you can control the direction precisely, and this has caused me to change the design a little bit. So it's not exactly the same as Kickoff 2, but when you play it, it has somehow the same kind of feel, and you get the same kind of tussles, and it takes you back. And in fact, I went and played Kickoff 2 at the Dutch Championships last weekend, which was very interesting, playing Kickoff 2 after developing the game. And there is enough of a connection. I came away from that thinking, well, there is still a strong connection between the two, even if you're not playing it with the traditional, 8-direction, chunky controllers that we had back then.
In terms of Kickoff Revival, how's the single player going to work?
All right, single player is, at the minimum, we are talking about playing against the CPU single matches. We want to have, obviously, competition modes and so on. But all I can really say at this point is we really need to ship the game. So there's the minimum that will ship on the first delivery or first shipment of the game is going to be the core gameplay experience. The dressing is something that we can add later. You know, we're intending to offer that as free DLC ongoing. So it's really because we could sort of hold on to the game until we've got all the wrapping, but we're kind of thinking it makes more sense to actually get the fun core gameplay out, and then over time we can add the various features that people want, and we can also listen to the community and they can tell us, you know, what their priorities are. Yeah.
Feedback.
Yeah.
So we saw you having a game with local multiplayer with Matthew there. Do you have online multiplayer as well?
That, my standard thing I say. The standard thing I say about that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Right.
But yeah, we do have an online mode, and it's being tested. And the only reason why I will be cagey about it is because I always am. But yeah, we really want to have that, and the signs right now are that will be very successful and smooth experience. But you've got to have a good internet connection. That's always the way, you know.
What would you say is the biggest change you've made to the classic formula, if indeed you've made any?
The biggest, well, I almost made a big change in that I almost went with 2 sticks and 2 buttons, and the earlier prototype did. But then what happened was I went to the World Cup, the Kickoff 2 World Cup in Dublin, and I had a really hard think afterwards, and I said, you know, let's go back to the roots of it. So it's still 1 button, 1 stick. But what, you know, really what it amounts to is there are some subtleties of the controls which are a bit different to work with a new controller. I'm trying to keep everything else as faithful as possible to the original game. I think there are some things that are enhanced though. So I mean, you know, in the original game, when you and the analog stick allows for it. The original game, you could trap the ball, and they would pass by pushing in a direction and letting go. Well, we don't have that now. What we've got is you can trap the ball, and then you can sort of strafe around with it. You've got a close ball control mode. Passing the ball is just an ordinary kick. This is possible because now you can control the power of the kick. So you know, so
lots of subtle changes on
they are, but I think there are enhancements. They're things that we couldn't do, or I couldn't do with the original game.
Let's talk about customization. So you've obviously not chosen to get an official license for obvious reasons, because it's about the gameplay rather than the presentation. Will the customization be widely encompassing enough that the fans will be able to add their own, I suppose, unofficial license?
We have to see, because there are some considerations legally on that one.
Right.
So there have been situations where companies or games have had to tone down the ability to edit. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but certainly this is something we will look at after the initial release. What I would like is for people to be free to customize their own teams the way that they want and to share them. But we have to see what. But because you can see, I've set up I've set up this famous football. I'm not even going to say a name. I've set up this famous football with these famous football. Yeah, there you are. It's all the current team, and then be able to share it with other players. I don't know what happens legally with that, so we will see.
So I know something that went on a lot back in the Amiga day. I know some of the football games back then did, but I don't think gaming was probably big enough to be really paid attention to by the lawyers, unlike today.
Back then it was, but even then with Player Manager, they were all randomised names, and we didn't use the club names. We just used the location.
Yeah.
I think now it's a lot worse, and it's not really part of what the game is about anyway, because as I say, it's really about you on there, and being able to select the kit for the team that you support, and being able to use the names of the players you edit in yourself. It's kind of like dressing, it's people like it. I know it's important for them, and we'll try our best. The biggest obstacle is a legal one, so I'm afraid I can't give any more information than that at this point. We have to see down the line.
So what prompted you to visit the Kickoff franchise at this particular point in time?
Well, I'd been wanting to do this a long time, and this is actually the 3rd attempt at this. The 2 other attempts happened around 2002 to 2005, and it was a very difficult stage in the industry. We basically had a period of nearly 20 years where indie disappeared. So why now? Frankly, it's because of Shahid at Sony, and he's now gone back to full-time independent game development. But he sent me a Vita kit, and so Sony have started to embrace indie game development. They've realised how important it is. Sony have invested in our project, which is absolutely fantastic, and given the opportunity for it to happen again. And I suppose after I got burnt 2 times previously, I wanted to make sure that the game would get published. And I didn't want to make a third football game that nobody's ever seen. So this one is actually going to be released, and that's really good, and hopefully I'll be able to carry on the story from there.
Is that the main influencing factor of what made you go with Sony?
And the expression "first come, first serve" comes to mind here. I mean, seriously, it's like they're the first AAA big publisher, whatever, that actually woke up to, not just for me, but also people like Jeff Minter, and it's mainly down to the work of Shahid's group, right, and the work that he's done.
Is it likely to come to PC or Xbox in the future? Is that a possibility?
So this one, because Sony have invested in the project, it is impolite to talk about. I don't want to talk about that, but I don't want to say no either. So that's all I really can say at this point.
So it's fair to say initially PS4 and Vita, and then see what comes out of it.
Yeah, I think you can look at the pattern for other games that Sony has invested in and done, and see what's happened with them. And it's a pretty good bet that it's the same thing will happen with us.
I'm with you. The industry has changed quite a lot in the last couple of decades. What are the most significant differences you've noticed developing a game today compared with back in the Amiga era?
Back in the Amiga era, it's a great question. I mean, we've got much better tools. We've got Unity, which I have to say, Unity did a brilliant job at democratizing video game development, and has been part of the rebirth of indie game development. Wonderful. It's interesting because you would think that it would get easier to make games, and somehow it doesn't seem to be the case. I'm still trying to work out why. I mean, because when I did Kickoff, it was written in assembler with a tool set that was never designed for game development. I mean, it cobbled together what you could. I was coding on the ST, compiling on the ST. I made my own parallel cable to download the game into the Amiga. I used the Amiga like a console, and yet I managed to ship. I finished Kickoff in 15 months from scratch, and so now I look at how long it takes. It's taking us to, it's taken me. I've probably been working on this game for 2.5 years. In my own time before going full time and so on. So I think things have become a lot more convenient, but this has not necessarily converted itself into productivity.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so even though we're going for a similar style of game, just the width of the architecture, I suppose the sheer number of possibilities almost serves as a time sink to the project.
I think that might be it. It's something certainly I believe that the art of design is all about cutting out things, not putting things in. And we look at the evolution of Revival. I mentioned that initially I was looking at 2 buttons and two sticks. But if I had made the decision to stick with 1 button and 1 stick right 2.5 years ago, maybe, we'd be even further along than we are now. So where did that come from? It came from a choice.
Yes.
And so maybe that's the story. Is the more choice that you have, the harder it is to design, and so the harder it becomes to make a game. So my tip here is maybe the right way to go is to start at the beginning of the project, constrain the hell out of your project right at the beginning, and then figure out how, with those constraints, to make the game work. And maybe that's the secret to having it all. I don't know. We'll see.
What was the game or moment that ignited your passion for gaming?
I think it was walking into an amusement arcade, and I don't know the age exactly, but there was Blockade, which was like the earliest version of Snake, Space Invaders, and some vector graphics, gravity, combat game thing. And yeah, you can imagine seeing Space Invaders. Everybody who saw Space Invaders, it was like a weird thing to see it. And it's kind of hypnotizing. And I was already interested in technology and so on, so I wanted to make games. It was just like, okay, that's what I want to do. I've got to figure it out. And so I was trying to cobble together a computer out of parts and making games with electronics, and whatever. Eventually, computers started to come into the home when I was about 13. My parents bought me an Acorn System 1. and that was really how I spent all my time.
You are, of course, a legend in the gaming industry, but who in the gaming industry is a legend to you?
That's a great question. So it would have to be Jeff Crammond, because he did the game Aviator, which is for me, and on the BBC Micro, which is for me one of the probably the greatest flight sim ever. That's how I remember it. But this is on an 8-bit, and it had this mode in it where you had these aliens. So you flew a Spitfire around, and but you had to land it. So if you wanted to keep flying, you had to get the landings right, and that was actually quite difficult. And then on top of that, he added a mode where you had these alien things that were landing in the fields, and they would plant pods. So you had to shoot them. It's incredible. In fact, I've got a copy, and I just need to get time to play it again on a BBC Micro. So Jeff Crammond, definitely a great inspiration, and there was also obviously David Braben and Ian Bell, Elite, because I remember going into the shop and buying this game and going home, and it's like for 3 days I did nothing but play, and my best gaming moments are still from that era. So they were definitely a big inspiration. And then maybe a guy who did Damocles, Paul Woke. It was called Encounter anyway. So it was a bit like Battlezone over there, right? But it was on the Atari, and you're just going in this tank flying around. Whatever. A lot of these arcade games were great inspirations.
And finally, if you could only play one other game, not including any of your own, for the rest of your life, which one would it be and why? I always get that look.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult one. It's like one game I could play for the rest of my life. It's very tough, that one, and it would change. My answer would change from time to time. I would have to say, from the fun that I had, I'd have to go back to 1995. The first time I played Descent 2 online. Because there was this thing called Kali, this service. So even though the game wasn't designed to play on the internet, you could. And so 95, I was playing Descent 2, and that was an awesome experience. Even though the game was never. In fact, actually, the flaws that came for duplicating power-ups and so on became part of the game. And just the way that there was a whole protocol, or when you played the game, anybody could end the level by blowing up the reactor. So what you had was this kind of etiquette of playing online Descent 2 that evolved from this. And even back then with 56k modems and so on, it was entirely playable. And for me, I never really recaptured that. So I think today my answer will be Descent 2 in 95.
Well, Dino Dini, best of luck with your game, and thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you.